All right, we talk about pallet logic. The pallet logic is actually a simple extension from our homework number homework number 2, I'm sorry. And we did this before in homework 2, and these are the incoming parts to the palletizer, and I just using some dummy generator and duplicate the entity, trying to make a lot of batches. And the source of the pallet actually right here, illustrate a little bit. And so the pallet was generated based on the exit event of the palletizer. So every time palletizer has an output, it will replace with a new pallet. And also initially it will generate a pallet to begin with. And here we specify the batch sizes every time, and for this example I'm using the 7 as my batch size and overall. And also want to go with the pallet logic. So to loading the pallet, we need a couple setup first, and first we need an attribute. I call it serial number. Okay, I call it serial number. And also I need to set up a state variable and specify what is the current pallet number. So let's see how I did this. Okay, go to the model entity and with the state, and I set up an integer state variable called serial number. And I explained a little bit how I'm going to use this. Also in the model state variables, I'm using a current pallet as one of the integer state variable, and to record what is the current pallet number. So okay, the current pallet number initially with a 0. Every time the pallet source generates a new pallet, it goes to the so-called source pallet exit. Let's take a look. And this source pallet exit actually just have 2 assign block. You can using a state assignment and so on and so forth, but I'm using add-on process just clearly illustrate what exactly what happened. The first we're going to increment the increase the pallet current pallet number from current pallet number to pallet to 1, and also I might make a copy of this current pallet number into a model entity serial number. So the pallet actually carried that number as well. We're going to use that later on to check if the angels and his twin brother actually match. We'll talk about this logic a little bit in detail for a few minutes. So initially we're going to set up this pallet source based on event of the palletizer exit, and then I'm going to run this exit. And this portion actually just have a 2 part. One part actually increase pallet number, the other part actually copy the pallet number into the model entity attribute called serial number. Next talks about the palletizer. The palletizer actually has not too much different from the homework 2, but it runs 2 different processes, add-on processes. I want to explain that a little bit. The concept is of this processes. We want to, when the pallet arrives, I'm going to create an angel when pallet arrives to the palletizer. The pallet batch number is created, so we record the current pallet number, and I ask for this angel for sleeping for 40 minutes time, and come back from heaven and check if his twin brother is still waiting in the queue, and of course the parent queue. If the pallet batch number current process is same as the stored in the angel serial number, then we're going to, if it's different, then of course I know my twin brother is already left and got is already find enough members and move on. So I simply just drop and dispose this angel. If the same, meaning my twin brother right now still waiting for more parts to come in to palletize. So we alter group size, or we can uh, uh, fill the pallet with a dummy entity, and there's two possibilities. Uh, After the pallet is unloaded and split, and check for the presence of the angel. If there's angels in your pallet, then just drop it. So because pallet is just dummy, and they don't count as a regular part. So let's go through this process a little bit. So I'm going to zoom in this for you. And this is the process. I'm going to explain in the process as in the palletizer parent input entered add-on process. The process is fairly simple. Let's take a look. In the beginning, when the pallet enter, I create an angel, and the original entity move on to the logic for getting pallet. The angel delay for period of time. In this example, I'm using 5 minutes as a delay, and your homework assignment probably 40 minutes. And then we're going to check if their twin brother is still there. We'll check two things. If the palletizers member input content number of weightings greater than equals to 0. If it's greater than 0, and then or the current pallet equals to the model entity serial number, meaning I check if my twin brother is still waiting in the queue. And the model entity serial number is the angel's serial number compared with this global state variable current pallet number. If they are the same, I know my twin brother is still waiting for parts to come in. If that's the case, I create enough dummy entity and to fill the pallet, so it actually equals to initial size of the pallet minus the palletizer member input processor number weighting minus 1. So we know there are enough in there, so it create enough to fill the pallet, delay for a small amount of time, and the last one is transfer all these dummy angel I generate and send them towards the member input buffer to fill the pallet. If my twin brother already left, for example, on this decide block, then I just go ahead, we can trash this pallet. So I'm going to move this pallet into a trash, pallet trash input buffer. So let's go back to the example. This is the pallet trash. You notice that there is no link between these into that. It's just empty space movement. Here is follow the regular movement. So the palletizer come in here. We create an angel, okay, and the original pallet goes on to stay in the parent's input buffer, waiting to be palletized. And then the angel, which is the twin brother, it just stay for a certain minute and decide if my twin brother still exists in by checking if the current pallet number equals to a model entity stored, the angel stored a serial number. If they are the same, meaning my twin brother is still there, otherwise it's not. Okay. And then if the twin brother is still there, I'm going to create enough, basically initial pallet size minus the palletizer, how many parts waiting in the member input buffer. So I will create enough, just fill the pallet, and then delay for a small amount of time, just let them get on and transfer them all into the member input buffer. So we basically create a lot of dummy pallet and send them into this dummy member input buffer. So from upstairs, I create some dummy pallet or entity and send them to the downstairs member input buffer. So this is the transfer. Okay. If my twin brother already left, which is now that I have no use for this angel, I just transfer them into the trash portion, and so on and so forth. So this is going to conclude. I'm going to run this a little bit, just show you how the pallet logic was going. Run this for you. Okay, initially they have enough batches coming in, so the pallet was full, filled by 7 altogether. You can see that up here, what is the pallet number actually generated from source? Is it sequentially? Okay, now we only have 4 in the member queue, and the pallet is waiting right here. Okay, waiting for a specific time, and the pallet is move on in, by itself. I'm sorry. And here I'm trying to see the next. I'm creating the parts fairly slow and trying to see if it's move on. But here you probably notice one thing: the pallets, empty pallet, even move on without any even any parts in there. How do you fix that? So again, the next batch showed up, and you fill the pallet, you keep them all on. Okay, this one is only have 5 right here, and wait for a period of time. It will move on with the 5. Okay, so this concludes the section of pallet logic.